Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, this is great. I mean, seeing all these new faces, it's such an honor. Thank you for giving me your time, at least for the next 10 minutes. I guess I would like to talk maybe about a few things about my work. Maybe just to give you an insight, maybe my process of making the work and the way that I usually go about it is that I'll be driving. Like my work starts from walks and driving down the street, finding objects, curating them. I like a friend told me, like you curate stuff, which means that I have like a certain palette or a certain aesthetic of what I'm looking for. I like to use objects that have been used, that have been out in the sun, that already have a rich history in of themselves. And I like to think that I give them a second chance. I mean, some of these objects come from interior spaces, exterior spaces. I find a lot, like I said, on the streets. But I also sometimes purchase things like on eBay, and specifically if I'm looking for something like an old radio that is hard to find, like at a flea market. And so I'll dumpster diving sometimes. And so it's a little bit of everything. And aside from that, it's like taking a lot of pictures of things that interest me. And some of these things make no sense to my other friends. Like we'll be visiting some beautiful town, and then I'll be like, oh, look at that wire, and take a picture. And think, wait, what? There's this beautiful building, and you're paying attention to these things. And so it's those little things that I question: what is that wire, or what is that thing doing there? And what is the story? And so I like to think of objects like that. I sketch a lot, I read a lot, I take a lot of notes, and eventually all this culminates into me being in the studio and working on multiple pieces, but at the same time giving them an openness so that I don't want to illustrate something specific. I mean, the work derives from the border, and growing up on both sides of the U.S. and Mexican side. And so eventually, I just let the work, kind of like come together very organically. Some of the pieces never get done. Some of them are there for years, to be honest. And then suddenly other pieces will just come up, and might finish a piece in one night. So, it's kind of playing like that. But what I want to get from my work, like I said, is not to illustrate something specifically, but something where you might find a familiar object from maybe the backyard, where you find like, plants and things like that, that will give you an entry point so that then the viewer will give meaning to the piece, from their recollection of, childhood memories, maybe of somebody or something. And so, that's kind of like how the work comes together. I like to use a lot of English, and I play a lot with language, English and Spanish, and kind of like mix them together. And so you might find words that make no sense there because they're not even English or Spanish. There are some, like, for example, that piece that says call today, but I mean, of course, you don't spell with a U today, but to me, it makes sense because it's like in Spanish is tu, like your day. It's today, it's today, it's today. uh, and you'll find other things like that. I will, underline certain things so even the words themselves get, depending on the text. For example, aparatos means apparatuses, like radios and things like this, computers, televisions. But the way that I have it, at least to make sense to me, is a, pa, ratos. It's like for moments. So then this becomes something else. And so, you'll find different, words within the artwork. Other things that I like to use and explore within the work is the use of books. Like I said, some of the books that I'm reading, I will have within the work, because I think that also kind of takes you, or takes me, into a different world. That is, there's more research into that. They speak specifically about certain issues that matter to me and that maybe the viewer might find interest, or seeing some of the books that is like, well, I wonder what that is, let me maybe find something like that. This one, for example, here we have Domestica, which is a book about uh, immigrant workers. It's about this research that was done in Los Angeles, where people from Mexico and Central America are living in the States, working, specifically women that are working as nannies. And so, how they leave their family and they're raising the children of American workers. And now the children get attached to them while they are not, helping, or they're not raising their own children. And so, I mean, it's very sad. And so that kind of brought me to where I bought it as a used book. So I just added AB. So now it's abused, little moments like that. And so, yeah, I think I enjoy using plants. I'm very inspired by a lot of different artists, by a lot of different people, conversations. But specifically and more recently, I think studying through art history and the many different topics that interest me, I think something that I finally grew up to admire is my dad's work, and specifically in the backyard. He'll put things together that are falling apart. Like, we normally, when there's a wobbling table, you'll put a piece of paper so that you stop it from wobbling. And so that's just like one of many examples, and he'll fix things in such a way that to me are very, uh, very creative, and they continue functioning. But I think even more than that, one of the things that I also think about is that if we fix things in such a manner that we never go back to fixing them, and we accept them as to what they are, and we find beauty in that, is there also a danger? And maybe as human behavior, are we doing the same to our emotions? Are we just fixing them and patching them just subtly, but not really investing more time into really fixing the problem, understanding, what is wrong, with us? Is there something that could make us better? And so it's kind of like all those things into the work in such a way that it's almost like, wait, what is this? Like, it almost looks like you found it, but it does take a lot of work to make it look that easy. So that was an old teacher from this other gallery in San Antonio called Presa House. But I played with the words where I moved them around, and it's saying like esa ho, so like that bitch. I know that right now we're in times where it's like, oh, you shouldn't have said that, but it's subtle in a way, like, to me. And this is the first time that I said it. That piece, I've had it for years and I've never shown it, but at the same time, there's like these barbed wires that are kind of like holding you back from, because there's a danger to that. But it's very specific to something, personal, and that I kind of like eventually voiced it or put it in visual. Okay, so rasquache is a term that was coined by an art historian, and his name is Tomás Ibarra Frausto. And what rasquache is, it's basically doing the best with what you have. It's like a very survivalist mode of living, but it's also, I think, even though it's now described in the art world, like rasquache having like this aesthetic of, fixing it the easiest way possible, but I think it extends. It's a global thing, and it's existed for many, many, many years. So rasquache is just a term that has been with us. I've had previous shows in other places where somebody from India will tell me, "Hey, we have something like that, but we call it this." There's other ideas. I really want to go to Brazil because I know that also, like in the favelas, they do, work with that, and they have a specific term for this kind of aesthetic, which is just do the best that you can with what you have. Yes. The that I mean, like I said, some of the pieces, it's not that I have something very specific, but something that I just kind of like gather, and the piece then becomes its own thing. And on the border, specifically, maybe like a decade ago, uh, there were a lot of women that were being abducted and killed, like on the maquiladoras. And so that is something that I think about, and I have researched. And it's not just that. Well, I mean, of course, it's the targeting of women that it's kind of like, oh, it's hateful, but it's also deeper than that, and it has to do with like the politics of the region, where also commerce has a lot to do with it. And so it's kind of like, by reading, I try to find layers. And so sometimes, like that piece, it's not that uh, I want to talk specifically about, a scenario, like in contrast to that other piece. Sometimes it's more open, and so that was a headline in the newspaper that I decided to use in that piece. But I don't have like, oh, the S stands for this, and it's just very open. And that's what's interesting, because sometimes, even with my own work, uh, it tends to shift meaning depending on what I've been growing with and understanding and reading. And so I think that's also uh, something that I find really exciting, that my work also changes with how I change. Uh, and so, yes. So one of the other things is that I grew up like in the 80s, right? And so a lot of these cassettes, or if not all of them, are from my dad's collection from that time. And so I grew up with this music, but the music itself, they're corridos. And what corridos are for folk stories of what's happening, but more specifically, a lot of them have to do with narcotráfico, with drug dealing, and also with heartbreak. I mean, as tough as Mexican men, specifically like here, tend to be, like, oh, I'm the macho guy. I mean, and they're so heartbroken. I'm like, the music talks about being heartbroken and how much they're suffering. And so it's like, oh, like, you appear to be this strong, but yet your music, transmits something else. And so I've used some of these cassettes, and some of the titles, even on the pieces, will come from this genre of music, of the corridos. But also some of the cassettes, for example, this one specifically comes from the collection of. Can I touch the word? Like this one, for example. This one's called Inglés sin barreras, which means English without barriers. And my mom, wanting to learn English on her own, and of course, maybe taking some classes at the community centers. Uh, I grew up also with this. My dad would have his music while he was fixing something outside or cutting grass or whatever, while my mom inside would be listening to this all day and repeating it out loud. And so there's this theme of da na 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 na, like, how these cassettes start. So and she would take care of these like you have no idea. Like, we couldn't touch them, because that's how she was going to learn English. And so eventually, now I think she has like a digital format with her iPhone and stuff. But I was like, can I have these? She's like, okay, take them. And so I decided, in honor to those specific times, to use them within my work, because I think it's really important of like the work that also goes into, to this, into the adaptability, especially now. And, I'm sorry, but like our political climate, uh, that people, especially like my mom, who was born on the Mexican side, but coming in and, let's say, not necessarily adapting fully, but also putting her 2 cents in, in the work. I mean, she came legally when she married my dad, right? Um, but just putting all that effort, which when I was a child, I was just like, oh, I would make fun of her sometimes, but now older, I'm like, oh my God, like, you really put a lot of work into understanding the language. And so it's kind of my little 2 cents of like, how can I immortalize those moments within my work so that hopefully these pieces, if they are to be in the museum, eventually, these will also be part of the narrative of what was happening at our contemporary times. And kind of, it hurts to like read the originals because some of the cassettes have like my dad's name on them, and I know that he again took care of his cassettes, and I'm using them, and so. But it also gives me, a lot of joy to show them the pictures of, the work, and they're like, oh my god, like it's in this gallery, and people are looking at it, and paying attention to this. Why? It's valuable. Now it is. It is very valuable.